guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe if you are new here, and if you are, I would love you to hit that bright red subscribe button down below. And of course, if you enjoy the video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. So today I have got for you another nursing video, and as always, it is sponsored by the lovely people over at Nurses.co.uk. If you haven't watched any of my nursing videos before, they are a careers website built for nurses by nurses. And on top of that, they have loads of great resources on their blog aimed at both qualified nurses and student nurses. So even if you aren't at the stage of looking for a job yet, I would definitely recommend you check out all the other resources they've got, both on their website and their social media. So I will leave all of that linked down below, as always. The final thing I want to mention before I jump into this month's video is that next month's nursing video is going to be a Q&A, because I get so many questions from you guys about all different kinds of things. So I thought it would be helpful to do a Q&A. I have already done a Q&A, so if you want to check that out, I will link that up there. But if you've got any new questions you want to ask, make sure you leave them in the comments down below, or you can tweet me, DM me on Twitter or Instagram. However you want to get in touch, drop me a message with your question, and I will try to include as many as I possibly can in the Q&A next month. But in this month's video, we're going to be talking about the things I wish I knew before I got into nursing. And this is both before I became a qualified nurse and kind of before I got into nursing full stop, you know, as a student nurse as well. For anyone who is new around here, I am a mental health nurse. I just qualified in August of 2018, and I went into nursing straight out of school. So I finished my A-levels and went straight into university to train to be a mental health nurse. So I think for me, and I imagine a lot of other people who didn't have any caring experience prior to this, you're probably going to be in the same boat wherein I didn't really know what to expect, to be honest with you, because my only knowledge of kind of nursing and healthcare came from what I read in the news, which is often not the reality, as well as kind of, you know, TV programs, movies, which again, let me tell you, nothing like real life. And now looking back, there's a lot of things that I wish I'd known sooner that I thought I'd share with you guys, because I'm curious if any of you watching this are already nurses or already student nurses, have felt some of the same things. I think one of the key features of my nursing videos is this whole kind of you're not alone thing. So that's one of my favorite things about making these videos, is I love hearing your guys' experiences in the comments, because then I realize it's not just me. The first thing that I feel like I learned very, very quickly into nursing is how brave you have to be a nurse. There have been so many times within my short career as a qualified nurse, as well as my times as a student nurse, when I've had to challenge people. And that is, you know, it's a scary thing to do. You've got to be quite brave to do that. And this can be all kinds of things. This can be, you know, challenging a consultant because you disagree with the decision they've made. This actually happened to me in my first ever placement. So there was me, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, swanning into my first ever placement. I was working in dementia care, and about 3 weeks in, there was something wrong with one of our patients, and I just knew there was something wrong. So the nurses escalated that to the consultant. The consultant, you know, had a quick chat with her and said, no, she's fine, there's nothing wrong. And the nurses on the ward were just like, oh, okay, well, you know, the consultant said she's fine, so okay then. But I just knew something was wrong, and I argued and argued and argued, and no one was listening to me. And I eventually went and found the manager and actually said, no, I am not happy with this. Can you come and deal with this? The manager agreed with me that something was really wrong and sent her in a blue light ambulance to the general hospital, and it turned out she'd had a stroke. And I was absolutely terrified, telling these nurses that have been doing their job for decades, telling this consultant who was like old enough to be my granddad, you know, I was challenging these people and telling them that me, this first year student nurse that had only been on the ward for 3 weeks, I thought they were wrong. And it was a really scary thing to do. But if I hadn't have done that, it doesn't bear thinking about what would have happened. You sometimes have to challenge people's perspective. I know some of my classmates when we were studying witnessed staff speaking in an incredibly racist way. So they had to challenge them and say, actually, it's not okay to be saying the things that you're saying. Or unfortunately, some mental health professionals still have a lot of stigma towards certain patients, and they will talk openly about that. And I know some of my colleagues have had to actually stand up and say, no, this is not okay. You should not be talking like that. You even sometimes have to do this with patients and their families. One of my patients has almost doubled in weight in less than a year, and he was about to go out on leave with his nan. So I just sort of had a quick chat with the two of them before they went out and sort of said, you know, be really conscious about the food choices you're making whilst you're out on leave. And both he and his nan got, you know, really defensive, saying it's the medication, it's his metabolism, etc. But actually I had to stand my ground and say, yes, those might be a contributing factor, but actually the food that you're buying him and the food that you are putting into your body is also a major factor. And that's really scary because people often don't respond very well to having their opinions and their beliefs challenged. But actually as a nurse, it's a really, really important skill, and it is expected of us under the NMC guidelines to be able to stand up for what we think is right to make sure that we get the best outcomes for our patients. So I think bravery is something that I didn't expect that I would need as a nurse, but I've now realized that it's definitely one of the most important qualities. Another thing I think I underestimated is how emotionally attached you are going to get to patients. And I chat with quite a few of my subscribers on sort of Twitter and Instagram regularly, and they tell me the same things, that they knew they were going to have sort of some emotional attachment to some patients, but they were surprised at how much it was and for how many people it was. And I just think that's the kind of people we are. I think you become a nurse because you're an incredibly caring, empathetic person. So if you didn't care for your patients, I would be quite worried. And I've spoken a little bit about this in previous videos, and I've had some quite nasty comments of people that have clearly been in this field for a long time telling me that, you know, I would never last and that I was too sensitive and that I seemed too weak to be a good mental health nurse. And I just think that's rubbish. So I think if you find yourself feeling the same way, use it as a strength. The fact that we care so much for our patients is a strength, in my opinion, not a weakness. You know, if it's getting to the point where you can't sleep at night because you're worrying so much, that's a different thing. But I think generally, really, really caring for your patients is a great quality to have and will make you a great nurse. But it can be mentally exhausting, and I think I didn't realise I've never worked in a job before where I'm still thinking about it even after my shift ends. You know, I've had quite a few sort of part-time jobs while I was going through school, and I never once thought about my place of work after I'd finished work until I went into nursing. A good example of this is, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now, one of my pretty high risk patients went AWOL whilst on escorted leave. And by the time I'd gone home, she still wasn't back and we still didn't know where she was. And I found myself worrying about her all that evening. I even ended up messaging the nurse that was on the night shift just to be like, hey, did so-and-so get back to the ward okay? Because I was just so concerned about her. And at the start of my career, a lot of people told me, oh, you get used to that and it doesn't bother you as much, you know, when you've been doing it for a long time. But actually, in my opinion, if I ever get to the point where a very high risk patient is in a risky situation and I don't even bat an eyelid at it, then I think that's the time that I need to leave nursing. I think it's the wrong mentality to get into. Like, yes, I'm going to become more comfortable with my decision making and I'm going to worry less about the decisions that I'm making. But actually, if I ever get to the point where I don't care what happens to a patient, then that's the end of nursing for me, in my opinion. But you will meet nurses that tell you, you know, you need to grow out of it and you'll learn not to do that, which for me is just a bit of a weird mindset. I think I also kind of misunderstood recovery before I got into nursing. And I think this is particularly relevant to mental health nursing, but can also apply to kind of other branches of nursing, in the sense that I thought that recovery was quite linear. Like, I expected that people might have setbacks, but I kind of thought the trend would always be sort of, you know, onwards and upwards. And I just kind of assumed that everyone would want to get better. And I think one of the hardest things that I had to come to terms with is not everyone's going to get better. Not everyone wants to get better. And actually, not everyone wants the kind of lives that we as professionals think they should have. I think this is definitely something that I was aware of as a student nurse, but I've become more and more aware of it as a qualified nurse, because obviously I've been in the same place for a lot longer this time. You know, my longest placement as a student was kind of 3 months, and I've now been in my job for sort of 4, coming up to 5 months. So I've seen patient journeys across a much wider range of time. As I've already said, I think most people get into nursing because they really care for people. So it can be difficult when you see that some people aren't getting better, or they're making choices which you deem to be poor choices, which results in them just taking 5 steps back rather than the step forward you wanted them to take. But I think eventually you get to the point of understanding that it is not your job to make people better. It is your job to care for them the best you can and give them all the resources they could need to help them get better. And if they don't get better, then that isn't because you failed and that isn't because they failed. That's just what happens sometimes. And actually, in my experience, the vast majority of people do get better. And even if they aren't able to live their lives in the way that you would want to live your life, their life is better enough that they can have some kind of independence and some kind of autonomy. And actually, seeing people get better is an incredible thing, but you've just got to be mindful that that isn't going to be everyone's experience. And that doesn't mean that you as a nurse have failed. Another thing that I think I didn't anticipate was this kind of fear you feel when you make decisions, particularly as a newly qualified. It's almost like when something goes wrong and you're like, right, I need to get an adult to sort this. and you kind of look around and realise that you are the adult. I very much feel like that sometimes as a nurse, where I'm like looking around for another nurse to like make this decision, and it's like, no, Chloe, you are the nurse in charge. This is your decision. I think as a student, I got this impression that all the nurses around me were just super confident and they knew exactly what they were doing, and that's how they were able to make these decisions. I actually spoke to one of the students on my ward about this quite recently and sort of said to her how sort of nervous I still got when I was making decisions or when I was disagreeing with a doctor, you know, that kind of thing. And she actually turned around to me and said that she was really surprised that I got that nervous making decisions, because her impression was that I was quite cool and calm, particularly during sort of, you know, difficult situations or when trying to make a difficult decision. And I just found that really interesting, that from her point of view, she saw me how I saw the nurses when I was a student. And then it kind of made me think, actually, maybe they were really doubting themselves, or maybe they were worried and felt like they were doing everything wrong, but I just wasn't able to see that. So I think that's a really good thing to remember when you're a student, is even if you feel like you're flapping and you don't know what you're doing and you're doing everything wrong, an outsider might think that you look cool, calm and collected. The only conclusion that I can come to is that I am a swan. You know, when you see swans like just serenely kind of like gliding along the water, but you know, in actual fact, they're like paddling like this underneath. That is how I think of myself during like serious incidents, that I've just got to convince everyone I'm a swan. It doesn't matter if I'm paddling like crazy underneath. I just need to let everyone think that I'm a swan, and that'll help the rest of my team kind of keep it together and make sure that we handle this difficult decision or this difficult situation the best we can. I think the really important thing to remember here is that there's no such thing as the right decision. You know, humans are unpredictable, and you could make a decision that you are absolutely confident is the right thing to do, and then something will go wrong. And then you could make another decision that you're a bit like, I don't know how I feel about this, and then everything's fine. You know, humans are unpredictable, so you really just don't know. All you can do is make the best evidence-based decision that you can. Sometimes you're going to have to take risks in the hope of a positive outcome, but if there isn't a positive outcome, it doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. That just happens sometimes. So I think the best advice I can give you is, don't think you have to make perfect decisions all the time. You just need to know why you've made that decision, what evidence you've got to back up that decision, and be able to justify it should you need to. And the final thing that I wish I'd known before I got into nursing is how much I was gonna love my job. Don't get me wrong, when my alarm goes off at 5:30 on a cold, wet, wintry morning, I sometimes don't want to get out of bed. But generally, I love going to work, I love my job, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to say that. For a lot of people out there, they do their job because it pays their bills and because it's a job available to them. But I do mine because I genuinely love it. During a lot of my placements as a student, quite frankly, I was miserable, and I think that's a combination of working in areas that I didn't particularly want to work in. I sometimes had quite bad mentors, and on top of placement, I was juggling having to do bank shifts to pay my rent and essays and deadlines and all things like that. So quite frankly, during some of my placements, I was miserable, and I was so worried that I was gonna hate my job. And I remember the kind of week before I started my job, I was petrified because I was just so afraid that I was going to walk onto that ward and I was going to hate it, and that I'd like wasted 3 years of my life training to do a job that I didn't want to do. But thankfully that wasn't the case, and I absolutely love my job. I love my patients. I'm very proud to call myself a nurse, and I love what being a nurse stands for. And I really wish that was something I'd known before I got into nursing, because I think it would have made my training a lot less difficult, because I would have known that I was going to love my job at the end. Like, I was pretty certain I would, but there were definitely days when I was like, if this was my job, I would have quit by now. Like, there were definitely days on placement when I was like, if this was my job, I would have quit by now. But thankfully, that hasn't been my experience as a qualified nurse. So yeah, I just feel very lucky to be a nurse and to call myself a nurse and to love my job. Quite frankly, I could ramble on for hours, but I think that is all I'm going to talk about in this video. As I said, please do share your experiences with me down in the comments. I love to have a chat with you guys, and leave me a question for the Q&A that's coming next month. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe, and of course check out Nurses.co.uk, and I will see you again next time.